Good. Thanks all for your interest in open access and open science. I prepared just a few slides to tell you about two areas of open access that I'm involved in personally, and that's as an editor of Physical Review. So I wanted to give you my motivation for why I was involved in starting a new fully open access journal within the Physical Review portfolio. And the second thing is as a member of the ERC, the European Research Council, Scientific Council, and in particular their working group on open science. And then most of my time, I'm hoping to get some feedback from you all about your opinions on open access, in particular, how you like to see the future of publishing, what's important to you in terms of open access, and so on. So here's just a brief history. I know many of you are using Physical Review as maybe your primary or one of your primary publication outlets. Physical Review has been around for a very long time, since 1893. Physical Review Letters started about 50 years after the beginning of Physical Review. It then broke up into smaller, more topical journals because the number of papers just got so large and new journals got added. And the first really relevant step for open access was in 2011 with the introduction of Physical Review X, which was the Physical Review portfolio's first really fully open access journal. Soon after that, it became possible to publish open access in all of the regular Physical Review journals, but these are now known as hybrid journals because most of the papers are paywalled, and you can choose to pay to publish open access. The year before last, we decided to start another Physical Review fully open access journal. That's Physical Review Research, of which I'm one of the lead editors. And our motivation was largely because Physical Review X had become very popular and actually rather exclusive. It had become kind of the nature physics level journal of the physical reviews. And we wanted to have a journal for very good quality work that was really Physical Review standard, but not kind of the absolute one paper every few years that you write, which would go into Physical Review X. And so that was really my motivation for starting this journal, to have a fully open access outlet for really solid, good quality physics work. I was also, I don't know if any of you have had the experience in material science of having a really beautiful paper that was rejected from Physical Review because you were told it was not really new physics. And so we wanted to broaden the scope to research topics that are of interest to the physics community. And so this I took directly from the website. We have a very broad scope: fundamental and applied, theoretical and experimental, also methodological and technical advances, which are not commonly found in the other Physical Review journals, and interdisciplinary and new emerging areas. And particularly, the results should be important and novel, advancing a particular field of research, but they don't have to advance physics, they just have to advance a field of research that's of interest to physicists. So this was a second motivation for me for being involved in starting Physical Review research. Okay, so the open access aspect, which is what we're to focus on today. So publishing costs money, right? The process of having peer review and producing a high quality journal, even if it's electronic, it has to be paid for at one side or another. And this is actually an aspect I would very much value at feedback from audience members on is, how important is this to you? Would you rather just post on the archive? And that also costs money, but it's largely covered by foundations. And in the open access model, the authors pay, because the reader then does not pay, and somebody has to pay the salaries of the professional editors. The Physical Review Research, we chose what's called CC BY International License, which is CCBY International License, which is a very liberal license. I just, sorry, your faces are covering my screen here. So readers can share, so they can copy and redistribute the material in any medium or format, and they can adapt it, remix, transform, and so on. And provided that they attribute, so they give appropriate credit and indicate where changes were made, and they may not apply legal terms or technological measures that restrict others from doing anything. So it's a very free license. The pricing for Physical Review Research, I don't know if any of you have published in Nature Communications lately, which is very expensive because it's a for-profit journal. We charge what it costs us, and it is about $2,000 per paper. It's the same pricing as if you want to publish hybrid in a publish open access in one of the hybrid journals. Of course, I worry as an editor of these charges excluding good papers that I would like to be able to publish. The American Physical Society also worries about this. It wants its work, the work in its journals to be available. So we waive publication costs for authors in countries for which the subscription journals are offered for free. So an author from those countries can also publish for free. And all of the journals are available in US public libraries and high schools by application, even the paywalled journals. But this, of course, is an issue if the whole publishing model switches to open access. What about people who can't afford to pay? This is, of course, a problem. Oops. Okay, so here's some questions for you. I think we'll have a little bit of time after I finish talking, and also at the end. I'd like to hear from you what you think about open access. Of course, we all like our work to be easy for people to access, but we'd like to not pay for it, I guess. So these are the obvious ones. How important is it for you to have a paper in a peer-reviewed journal compared with publishing on the archive? For me, it doesn't matter anymore, but I already have my ETH chair. So I'd very much like to hear your feedback on that. And then also about open data and open science, which Giovanni will talk about later. So just 1 minute then, I'll just, in my last minute, tell you about the European Research Council and my work on the Scientific Council and the Working Group on Open Science. The ERC, for many of you, may not be the most relevant thing yet, although if your advisor is funding you from her or his ERC grant, then you will have to be aware of their open access requirements. And certainly when you write your first starting grant proposal, then you'll have to be, even in the proposal, aware of what's required for open access and open data. So the ERC, actually, even before it started issuing grants in 2006, made its first statement on open access, promoting open access. And from 2014, all publications funded by the ERC must be open access. Sorry about the typo there. They don't have to be published in fully open access journals, but they have to be, the author approved manuscript must be made available within the legal limits of the publisher. And from 2016, there's a recommendation on data retention and sharing, but not a requirement. And I just close by saying, the philosophy of the ERC on this is to really promote as much as possible open access, open science, open data, without restricting anybody's ability to do excellent research. So to try not to impose too much bureaucracy while still trying to promote the principles of open science and open access. So I'll stop there, and I'll be very happy to take any short questions now, I think, before Nicola speaks. And I again, very much value your feedback on these issues, because I will then take your ideas to these discussions that I have on these topics.
This is more, a summary of the guidelines about open access for papers and for data. What I did also in the next slide is provide a summary of more general recommendations. By the way, you will find these slides and all the information on the toolbox of NCCR Marvel. So there is Marvel specific information, but there will be also these informations, the pointer to the website from the Swiss National Science Foundation, and the pointer to the H2020 website on open access. And in this also, I really need to acknowledge Dr. Lidia Fav-Quattropani that has really prepared the slides. We have discussed them together, but it's all her merit. And also Dr. Tobias Philipp at the Swiss National Science Foundation, that is really the person in charge of open access and has given very valuable feedback and advice. So the next slide is just personal. So I think, this is something that I often say my students, sometimes I forget. So I'm using this also to tell them, but, I was I put my, let's say, advisor hat on. I think in general, even before, say, starting a paper, but when you start a project, try to make sure that, you understand who is going to contribute to the project, what are the, the limits and the scope of the project, so you don't have project creep. Of course, things are going to change in the course of the progress, but it's always good to start with a plan. And typically you should discuss that with your supervisor. This is for my students only. Even more important is when in this project you start a paper, make sure you discuss and agree on the topic and the scope of the paper, but especially who does what, not only in terms of the preliminary research, but in terms of writing, and who are the authors, and also the order that these days is important. I mean, in certain journals, the corresponding authors matters. The last authors is somehow often the senior supervisor person. The first author is typically the person that has done the job. Often you can sort of have 2 or 3 equally contributing authors. I think on Nature Scientific Data we had a paper with 18 equally contributing authors. And now we go towards, advice that is also very relevant for what we'll say later. And this is often forgotten and is incredibly important. You need to acknowledge the funding sources. Your supervisor is going to get in trouble if, work that has been supported by, say, a SNSF grant. Let's talk about Marvel. So the work has been supported by Marvel. If you don't acknowledge, we can't show to the Swiss National Foundation that their funding has gone towards that paper. So I don't want to be harsh, but it's almost like stealing money. Someone gives you funding to do a project, and you really need to properly acknowledge it. It's also very good to be generous with acknowledging, everyone that has given you advice for your work. And these days, what is becoming ever more important is that you have to disclose it to partners. Every single European project complies with the general agreement. So no matter what your consortium agreement is, the general agreement, the Article 29 about the dissemination, specify that you need to disclose to all partners 30 days in advance, an intent to disseminate. That actually, strictly speaking, means that you should also notify all partners that you're giving a talk in that topic. This latter is probably, the most overlooked and I think also slightly meaningless, if I could say, rule that I can think of, because it's just not practically possible. But that in principle is the regulation. The regulation on papers is becoming very, very sharp, and now many European projects actually implement what has always been a rule. You need to give notice to disseminate. Back with my advisor hat on. When you start a project, remember to search the literature. And, I would say it is so often the case that, very much into a project one discovers that there was key work that had been published and has been overlooked. And these days doing, literature search is so easy. And, now I put really my sort of, old scientist hat on. When I started, there was nothing digitalized. There were, enormous summaries and citation indices were actually books that you had to, painstakingly go over. And now we go into the topic of the slides. Remember to have an open access plan, both for the paper and the data. So let me start with, the Swiss National Science Foundation regulations. So these are formal binding if you are funded by the Swiss SNSF, say if you're a Marvel researcher, but also if you're supported by a Synergia, by a fellowship, by an individual project, you have to comply with these rules. And they are summarized on this open access 100.snf.ch website. And remember, these slides will be on the Marvel Toolbox. So the gold route means that you publish in a fully open access journal. There is this list, the oij.org, and the article processing charges, APC, will be covered by the SNSF if the publication is properly acknowledging the SNSF grant. So this is easy. The green route is more complex because, you know, for years I told my students we should always publish on the archive, archive.org. I still think, you know, this is the best recommendation I can give, but it's not really compliant, neither for the SNSF nor for the European Commission to being a green route publication. A green route means that you put either the published PDF, that it's very rare that journals will allow it, but you know, the post-print, this is the most important concept, the accepted manuscript, that is your submitted manuscript plus all the changes that you have made through the peer reviewing process. And even if you have not made any changes, we are still thinking about the post-print as the manuscript as it's going to be published, minus the formatting. And in order to be green route, you need to put that post-print manuscript on a repository. So we see it in bold. The submitted version, what you send to the archive, is not good enough. Now, the issue here is that for green route on a repository, you need to have it you know, within 6 months from publication. Okay, so you don't have to submit it the day it's published, but within 6 months. And many journals have much longer embargoes of 12 to 24 months. So the green route is quite complicated. I'll come back to it later. You know, many institutional repositories allow you to submit, you know, right away your postprint specifying an embargo period, so you can submit and forget about it, but still it needs to be within 6 months. And the last route is publishing not in a fully open access journal, but in what is called a hybrid journal, where only certain articles are open access. This is also absolutely acceptable. The SNSF will not pay the article processing charges. Note that in this category of hybrid journals, for Swiss researchers, there are a number of treaties that have been signed with Elsevier, with Springer Nature, and with Wiley for what we call read and publish. So it means that you have either a discount or a full waiver of the article processing charges. The regulation for H2020 are very similar. Again, self-archiving, green open access, but you need to put the final peer-reviewed manuscript, the post-print, within 6 months. If you're in the social sciences, humanities, 12 months. The gold open access is, again, sending it to an open access journal, and the article processing charges are eligible for reimbursement during the duration of the project. So you need to be careful that you know, you can still spend that money. For data, Giovanni will talk about the Swiss National Science Foundation that is becoming really strict, and Horizon Europe will probably be similar. For now, in H2020, there was a pilot for data management plans, and we actually provide templates on the materials cloud. Giovanni will mention that. And here is the link to the very, very long website name from the European Commission with those data. Tools to understand, you know, how to navigate this space. The Swiss National Science Foundation has just launched an early pilot collaboration to handle directly the article processing charges. So you can use Chronos Hub and Journal Finder Beta to select a journal, check a compliance, and follow what needs to be done so that the article processing charges are automatically processed without going through the My SNSF. Also, there is another prototype for open access check. You can check what is your own open access profile. These days, for a couple of months, has been also possible on Google Scholar. It's still working. So if you check yourself, you will discover that this is me. A number of papers are green, a number of papers are gold, some are green, hybrid, other open access. This is the archive that really should disappear, and some are closed. And of course, in many cases, you have collaborative papers with collaborators that are from different countries and so different regulations. So also that is something that we are negotiating. UnpyWall is a plugin that you can install on Chrome or Firefox to find the open access version of a publication. And Sherpa Romeo has been really the pioneer in classifying all the information for publisher copyright and open access policies that is particularly relevant for the embargo period. I've already told you about the cons that is of the archive, that is it's really not compliant to the green route. Okay, so if you publish on the archive, sadly, I think you're not compliant with open access. The archive does one thing that is very important, is fantastic, and almost no one allows it. And that's what I think drives me nuts sometimes. That is, even if you publish, say, gold open access, typically the regulation tell you that it's not allowed to electronically harvest those articles for operations like data mining or text mining. So even gold open access papers allow only individuals to download them and to read them, but they do not allow text mining. That will be a fundamental part of science. So I often say, even if you publish a gold open access, you're actually giving away the rights for future machine learning data mine engine to read what you have done. Archive allows it. So as you can see, it's a complex world, this of open access. Last, be careful. There are these days both predatory conferences that invite you, but they are just money-making machines, and there are also a lot of journals that are called predatory journals that really are there as for-profit enterprises, basically sucking away funding from university and agency. And here again are resources to look at what could be the right journals. Typically also your advisor is quite experienced. Another final, and then I'm done, a recommendation coming directly from the Swiss National Science Foundation is that, as soon as you have the postprint, deposit it on the institutional repository that typically allows to specify an embargo, but you need to know what is the embargo time. I think with this I'm finished. If you forget it was a lot of information to process, just go to the website here and you find all the slides, hopefully self-explanatory.
So, hello everybody. So in this last part of this seminar, I wanted to discuss a bit more instead the regulations about open research data rather than open access to journals. And in particular, I wanted to mention what in Marvel we've been developing and making it available for all Marvel people, but also for actually any researcher in the world to make this much easier. So the first thing is what is the requirement? So this is what really SNSF requires us to do as anybody who gets any funding from, let's say, Marvel or any other SNSF project. And you can find this on this page, for instance. It really requires all data needed to reproduce your paper is made available openly at the latest by the time of the publication. So it's even stronger requirements than there's no embargo essentially, and they're quite strict on that. So the day in which your paper becomes public, you have to make your data public so that another person is able to reproduce what you did, what you computed or simulated or experiments did in your paper. And in order to make this easy, what we have been developing, and it's been online for some years now, is what we call the Materials Cloud Archive. It's already been mentioned earlier that it's a repository for research data, and in particular, it's a repository for research data in materials science. And it's already recommended as the place to host your data by both the Nature's Journal Scientific Data and also by the new European journal Open Research Europe, which we were discussing before. Just one slide to give you a sense of the current amount of data we are hosting and also a bit of how much this data is actually used. First of all, the data is for Marvel, but it's for open to the world. Anybody can register for free and put their data, and Materials Cloud Archive will essentially guarantee, not only give you a DOI for your data, but also guarantee that that data remains online for at least 10 years. And that's done together with a partnership with CSCS, who's developing a new also long-term storage support. There are some limits, which are general, like 5 gigabytes for anybody or 50 if you use AIDA, just because often there you have more data. But in reality, for Marvel, these limits are lifted. So if you are publishing a Marvel paper, you have more data, you just have to write to us. There is an email later, archive@materialscloud.org, and we essentially lift this limit. The archive was launched in 2017, and you see the number of papers has been steadily growing. There's a lot of papers, of entries on the archive, so the data associated to a paper has been steadily growing. Currently, we are hosting a bit less than a terabyte of files, which actually already contains millions of crystal structures, many of them really coming from DFT calculations. And an interesting statistic we just pulled out is that in the past year, every month, there are about 13,000 files which are downloaded. It's kind of been constant in the past 12 months. And we are serving essentially about 5 to 10 terabytes of data per month to people downloading this data. So this starts to be really a resource where people find this data and want to use this data. In addition, the SNSF not only requires the data to be available, but also requires the NCCRs, so Marvel, to produce what's called a dataset index. That's something that essentially Lydia prepares when she does the report every year, thanks to the data that you provide in the various BibTeX. And it's essentially an index that is listing for every piece of data we have and what's the related publication. And if you host data on the archive, the advantage is that all this information becomes automatic. So this will automatically be loaded for you. You don't have to explain this, to say again to us, to Marvel, to Lydia, that you also have that piece of data. One point I wanted to make, however, is that publishing the data is a requirement again. So if you get money from SNSF, you have to do it. But still, it has some benefits. I mean, it's not just done for fun, let's say, but it's really, first of all, you will make your data citable. You get a DOI. So if you put it here, you can really cite your data and other people can cite your data. The second thing, you don't have to worry about things you have to write in data management plans. So you don't have to worry that, say, my data is going to be available for 10 years. You put it there and we will take care of it. And finally, which I think maybe something you care most, is that it will really boost visibility to your research. You already have a number of examples of people who contact the authors just because they find the data of the paper there. They start using it for maybe a different reason, something the original authors didn't think about. And so in practice, it will increase your citation count. You put the data there, your data will be more reusable, and in practice, people will cite your paper more. One important thing, and Nicola already mentioned, is that also at this URL you see here, we also provide some templates for data management plans. So if you're applying for a new project, you'll be required already, essentially by SNSF or by European project or many other funding agencies, to write a document which tells how you're going to store your data during and after the research, how you're going to ensure that the data is going to be there at least 10 years after your paper is published and so on. So this, as I said, is all taken care, but not only we take care of the storage, but we also provide some templates. You can have sentences you can copy paste and complete when you prepare your DMP for your project. Now, very briefly, I wanted to go quickly through some screenshots of how actually the archive looks like, both for users, if you just want to look for data and get data by some other author, but also when you have to put your data there to publish your data. And then we'll just finish with 2 slides then with some recommendations on how to organize your data. First of all, if you get a DOI, let's say this one in a paper, you go to an entry. I just took one of mine just as an example. The entry is nothing really special. It has an entry ID, which plays a bit the role of a volume and page number in a normal journal. There are title, authors with affiliations. There is a DOI, that's the important thing, something we release, we give for you. And there is also, there is also a sentence you can copy. If you don't know how the format to cite this entry, you can just copy paste this string. There is a description, which essentially is an abstract. So you just have to write essentially a very similar abstract to your paper, just maybe mentioning that about the data and explain what the data is about. And if you use AIDA, but it's really optional, so if you don't, just forget about this. You can also have sections of Materials Cloud called, as you know, maybe Discover and Explore, where the data is actually explorable. You can go and visualize it interactively. But that, again, is optional. And then if you go below, you have a section with files. So you will create your files with all the data needed to reproduce your paper. This could be Python scripts, this could be input files, this could be crystal structures, input and output of your code, etc. You prepare them, you prepare a more short description, and you upload them. You have to pick a license. If you don't know, the default one is CC BY, similar to the one Nicola was explaining at the beginning. So you just pick the default. Otherwise, there is a list of licenses you can pick from. And then, very importantly, you can reference the actual scientific publication that you have been writing. So Materials Cloud Archive will host only the data. If you want to host a paper, you can go on the archive or you publish it. But it's very important that you can put, and you should actually put your papers here for two reasons. One, people will, if the people land here and get the data, they know which paper to cite. If they don't know, maybe they just use the data and they don't cite your scientific paper. And the second one, because again, we'll make it automatic for us and for Lydia to prepare a BibTeX to give it to you during the preparation of the yearly Marvel report. So you don't have to re-prepare the BibTeX again. We just do it for you. Finally, there are some keywords, just things to make it easier to find your data. But we also discussed it's important for Marvel research to use specific keywords to make this process I was mentioning automatic. And finally, every version, you can have an entry and then you can update it. There are multiple versions which are linked. Each of them has a DOI. So you can point to a specific version. And if you land on an old version, at the top of the page, you find a banner which says, look, you are version 2, but there are more recent versions. So you can, in a paper, you will probably cite a given version, V2, and then if you update it, people will anyway discover it. So all of what I showed is when you want to get data by someone else. Now, if you want to upload the data, what you have to do is to log in or create an account the first time. You have your own page. You can either create a new record, so create a new entry, or edit existing entries. For instance, here now I don't have any entry which is still being reviewed, but I have other entries which are already published. By editing them, I can do two things. I can either create a new version, so it would just copy all the information and allow me to change some files, change some text. Or I can just, without even creating a new version, change the keywords and change the references. Very typically, you put the data there when you put it in the archive. And then when your paper is published, you just want to mention what's the final citation, the final paper citation. So you just can go here, click, put a new citation, and that's it. In addition, when you open one of your entries in a draft or a published one, you have a preview of the entry, but you also can see all the email exchange, because Materials Cloud Archive is not only guaranteeing the data to be there, etc., but it's also a moderated repository. You put the data there is a moderator who will read it. It's not a scientific peer review, it's just a person who will suggest you how possibly, if needed, to improve the format of your data and make it easier to access using only open formats and so on. And so all the exchange will be recorded here. Any doubt you have, you can just go on the top menu of your webpage, of the archive webpage. There is some mission instructions. They are summarized here. You can read them. And there is also an example how the form looks like, which is a bit like this. Again, these are only fields where you can fill in the fields I was showing you before: title, description, author, license, etc. So I won't go through it in detail. So in the final two slides, I just wanted to summarize a couple of recommendations. So first of all, what you should do. It's very easy. You go to the Materials Cloud Archive, and there's a URL. You sign up if it's the first time or you already have a login. And for every paper which you are an author or co-author of, you have to create files with all the data needed to reproduce your paper and prepare a README. Go in this login, sign in so fill in the form and prepare this submission. When you will do it, you will get immediate DOI, which you can already use in your citations in the paper. This will not resolve until the paper is really approved by the moderator. And this will take typically a week. And then with this DOI, you can already, in your scientific paper, write a sentence like this: the data and the scripts used to create all results and images in this work are available on the Materials Archive. And then you can use this kind of format in the citation. And this is an example. You can write whatever you think is appropriate, but you can really put a citation to the entry. And one thing, again, I want to stress, once your paper is published, it's good if you go back there and just very quick, just update the reference the same way you would do in the archive with the X. And final comment, how to fill in the form. So there are these references, so please go here and read them. And if you really have questions which are not answered, you can just write an email to us. Use title and description with the same style as a paper. So it's really not, don't write just a word or a sentence. It really should be like an abstract. And importantly for Marvel, you have to, it's explained here, but you have to put a keyword Marvel. And also, if you can, the keyword Marvel / and your project. So DD1, DD2, DD3, OSP, etc. This again, as I mentioned earlier, will make it automatic for Lydia to create a bibliothèque. And so you will get already the bibliothèque with your paper and data pre-filled. Please favor open formats. So please try to use as much as possible formats which are open and don't require commercial software to be opened. And make the structure of the file as easy as possible. So the way I typically think is I should be able to go back in a year and remember what I did. If this is possible, I think another person would be able to reuse your data, and therefore you get more citations. If you have many files, you can zip them, of course. And I still think it's important to put an outer README. So one single text file you put there. You can see some examples here from my research, but there are many. Just because in this way, if you have a 5 GB file, a user can go check the README and understand if they care about your data or not before downloading a big file. With this, I stop, and I'm happy to take any questions.